Martin Luther King Jr. borrowed from the words of Minister Theodore Parker, a militant advocate against slavery in the 1800s, to explain his faith that the work of justice would prevail, because that is a measure of faith. Let us listen to the original words of Theodore Parker from his sermon of Justice and Conscience, published in 1853, when he said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. But from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." Our first speaker today teaches us that the universe bends towards justice because we bend toward justice. And I want to introduce Rodney Hurst. And Rodney will tell you, as a youngster, Rodney, can I give your age? Of 80. He's a father. Yay, we should say, yeah, absolutely. Father, grandfather, great-grandfather, widower, cancer survivor, and civil rights leader from a very young age, joining the NAACP at 11 years old and participating in the peaceful demonstrations to desegregate our dining counters in Jacksonville, which resulted in axe handle Saturday. Author of various books, including It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, about the sit-in demonstrations in Jacksonville, and Axe Handle Saturday, and Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told, and others. He is a beacon of light for us. Rodney.
Good morning. Hey, where are you sitting? Okay, all right. My Facebook friend. Let me say a few words about my friend Ike Williams. I joined the Youth Council NAACP when I was age 11. That was 69 years ago. And when I got there, I met Ike. Ike was involved in advising the Youth Council NAACP. And then Ike said, "I want to invite you to my church," me and others, including the advisor to the Youth Council and my mentor, Mr. Rutledge Pearson. "Ike, what's the name of your church?" "The Unitarian Church." "What is the Unitarian Church?" "You'll like it." So one Sunday morning, we went, about 7 or 8 of us, Black Youth Council members, went over to the old rich area of Jacksonville, Avondale and Riverside, to a service that had no Black folk at all, other than Ike. But it was a service of warmth and openness and invitation and inviting you in. And it was so Ike Williams. It's interesting when we talk about Ike and truth and how he wanted to start newspapers, which he did. The Florida Times-Union had a section in the newspaper back in the 50s and into the 60s called News for and About the Colored People of Jacksonville. That's where all of the colored or the Negro news was found in the Florida Times-Union. There were 4 HBCUs in and around Jacksonville within 160 miles, Florida A&M in Tallahassee, Florida Memorial in St. Augustine, Bethune-Cookman in Daytona Beach, and of course, Edward Waters College here in Jacksonville. And notwithstanding these great institutions of higher education and learning, they were relegated to news for and about the colored people of Jacksonville. And what happened, it was a section at the very end of the newspaper. And for home delivery to Black homes, the newspaper for Black home delivery, including news for and about the colored people of Jacksonville, would be delivered to Black homes. For white homes, it was cut out. White folk never got a copy of news for and about the colored people of Jacksonville. But that was Jacksonville then. And when Ike did his pioneering in this community for Black truth, he told the truth from the Fourth Estate, where the slogan and the motto of newspapers were usually, "You have a right to know." I brought that to Jacksonville, just like I brought a Black face to the Unitarian Church here in Jacksonville. In 2021, I was in Washington, D.C., minister, for the funeral of Dr. James Lowen, who wrote a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. I was the only non-family member asked to speak at Jim's funeral at the All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. And I couldn't help but, whenever I go to a Unitarian church, think about my experiences with the Unitarian Church here, even though that was a funeral. When I met Ike at the NAACP Youth Council, and Ike introduced me to the Unitarian Church at a tender age of 11, even though I was a Baptist then. He also introduced me to Reverend Charles White McGee, who was an active participant and supporter of the NAACP. Understand that when Black folk and white folk get together, it is a culture clash. See, we don't communicate with each other in truth. We say to each other what we think we want them to hear. Diversity, equity, and inclusion were words that were developed by white folk to make it easier for them to talk about the inclusion of Black folk. And then white folk decided they would demonize those words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as if they were four-letter words. Culture clashes. So we don't deal with the truth. We hide behind, it makes me feel guilty and uncomfortable. So now we celebrate the birthday of Dr. King as one of only two named holidays we have in this country, Christopher Columbus, and how in the world we celebrate the discoverer of America for someone who never landed or set foot in this country is beyond me, but that's another conversation. And Dr. Martin Luther King. And then we even lie about that. Oh, Dr. King said he only looks at the content of a person's character. What a great statement. And when Dr. King died, white America thought he was the most dangerous man in this country. So we don't talk about that. I call American history incomplete, dishonest, and racist. Because it is. We lie to our young people. We have lied to your parents, my parents, your grandparents, and to you. All of my books have been about Black history, civil rights history, and racism. And many of them started, that beginning of understanding Black human dignity and respect started 69 years ago, when I had an American history teacher say to me, if you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. And in this Negro American history class, in this Negro junior high school, in the Negro division of the Duval County public school system, he told us and my classmates, leave that American history textbook at home. There were only two Blacks in that textbook, George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington, as if they were the only Blacks to make salient contributions to American history. So that was not truth. So let me close, Minister. I don't want to get that carried away, but I do get carried away. When I spoke during the Martin Luther King breakfast, I introduced Lift Every Voice and Sing. Lift Every Voice and Sing was written by James Weldon Johnson in Jacksonville on the campus of the Bethel Baptist Institutional Church. And even though James Weldon Johnson was asked initially to write this song in commemoration of Abraham Lincoln, who's called the great emancipator among Blacks during that time, but he changed the writing of this majestic masterpiece to focus on the plight of Black folk at that time, who 35 years after slavery were being lynched on an average of 3 to 5 Blacks a week in this country. So let me close with you and thank you for indulging me and thank you for recognizing my friend Ike. Let me close with this last hymn, this last verse of this great hymn by James Weldon Johnson. A hymn that, even though it's referred to as the Negro National Anthem, it is the embodiment of Black folk. I spoke to a Jewish temple, conservative Jewish temple, not long ago. And the rabbi, after I spoke and after I made references to Lift Every Voice and Sing, he said, Rodney, I was not familiar with the song. said, but after you wrote about it in your book, and obviously I knew you were going to talk about it, I looked it up. And I read the words to Lift Every Voice and Sing. And that song talks to oppressed people everywhere. James Weldon Johnson in the last verse said, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. And this great humanitarian, this first Black lawyer in the state of Florida, this leader of the Harlem Renaissance, this executive secretary of the NAACP for 10 years, closed this masterpiece, this masterful work, by saying, shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God and true to our native land. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Rodney. And it has been much too long, so we'll invite you back. I wanted to now ask Mia Jones to say a few words. Mia served in Ed Austin's administration, served on city council, and represented the 14th District in the Florida House of Representatives. She is much more than that. But currently, she is the Chief Executive Officer at Agape Health. But her contributions to the community and the legacy that those that came before her left her are important to share. Mia?
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. Now, Peter and I have known each other since 2000, and I thought we were friends. And when I got here, and from the back, I called Rodney, Uncle Rodney, because I've called him that all of my life. I saw the back of his head, and I said, oh my God. Okay, I hope he's speaking after me. And we walk up, and we stood right there, and Peter says, and Rodney is going to speak, and then you're going to speak. And I said, oh my God. So pray with me. And I forgive you. I have been blessed, to say the least, to be born to parents Lawrence and Hannah Jones. My mother was a school teacher and administrator in the Duval County School District for over 30 years. My father was the executive director and vice president of Johnson YMCA on the north side of Jacksonville, where it was the only place that kids had to go. And then people don't talk about it a lot, but he also started a branch on the east side of Jacksonville across from the Gator Bowl for the kids in that community. Because for those of you who don't know, for African Americans, there was like a transition from the east side into downtown, into La Villa, over into the Myrtle Avenue, Moncrief area, further north, going up to, even now, up to the airport, just before Ocean Way. And when I think about the relationship of my family and Ike, I just say that I've been blessed. My parents put us in a situation where we were surrounded by people who loved us, who surrounded us, educated us, but weren't blood. And so you might hear me talk about Uncle Rodney. We aren't blood, but that's Uncle Rodney. And I have had the opportunity to watch, and I tell people I learn by sitting quietly and listening. I can remember being in the house when my mom and dad would have family friends over. Rodney, he's an awesome speaker. He's a historian, but he's a great DJ. And he would bring his albums, and they would play cards and talk, laugh. My mom loved to cook. And that was our experience on a regular basis, weekly almost. And we could hear from Betty Hosendorf and Rodney and Ike and others. But I can remember I would get up under the dining room table and pull the chairs in because I was only this big. And I could just listen to what they would say. And people would say to me, "What made you go into politics?" And I said I was raised in it. They would put us on the corner, put shirts on us, and they say, "Stand there, wave and smile." You hold a sign, you wave and you smile. And when you got to graduate to being able to knock on doors and tell people about whoever the person was, you thought you were doing something. Then you had the opportunity to get on the phone and call people and introduce them to whoever that candidate might have been. It all planted the seed for me to say when I came back to Jacksonville that one day I'm going to run for office. You hear people talk about somebody tapped them on the shoulder or called them up and said, "You should run." I don't believe in that, because I saw the sacrifices that elected officials had to make. And so I believe that you had to do it because it was what you wanted to do, because you and your family were going to be the ones that were going to sacrifice. And so I saw me, I was born in 1968. Ike was leaving FAMU around that time in law school. He was one of 57 students that graduated from the original FAMU law school. And he was so excited when I said I was going to FAMU. He would always encourage me. He would always share the experience of being at FAMU. Ike also is one of the few people that I know that has degrees from 3 historically black institutions. Florida A&M, his law degree, and then bachelor's degrees, I think, from both Edward Waters and Florida Memorial. Ike was a man who believed in education. He believed in reading and then sharing what he learned. We've heard about his newspaper. He and I would joke, and I would say that when I started running for office, I ran for 2 years before the election. And I tell you, I was in the paper every single week. We didn't talk about it. It just happened because you heard Alton Yates say he was everywhere. And if I was there, he got me. He helped to tell my story. But he also would sow seeds into me and encourage me. And I know that it wasn't just because of his relationship with my father and mother, but I know that it was because he knew how important it was to sow into young people. So hearing of the work that he did with the youth council is not something that was abnormal. It was sown into him. It was built into him. And so when I think of Ike Williams, I would look at him and I'm going off to FAMU and I'm there, or I'll come home and he'd slip me a little money. And I would say, Mama, why does Mr. Ike always give me some money? She said, I didn't know he was doing that. I don't know why he's doing that. So, okay. But I thank him. I thank God for the opportunity to have been able to know him as a child and then to know him as an adult, and to be able to look now over his life and the impact that he made. It wasn't just on me. There are hundreds and thousands of folks that he touched. I want to thank Marilyn, because when she married him, I don't know if she knew what all she was getting into, but she had to share him with everybody, every day. And I personally want to thank you from our family. Ike was a staunch supporter of Florida Memorial. And he and my dad, they would raise money for Florida Memorial. They would give money to Florida Memorial. And they understood that it was important for Florida Memorial to stay around. They knew that Edward Waters had a greater support system. They knew that FAMU had a great support system. But Florida Memorial needed that extra support, and they were committed to giving it. So I thank you. I thank you, Peter, and the church for honoring him, recognizing him, but most importantly, for remembering him and remembering the work that he did. Because he didn't do it for honors. He didn't do it for anybody to know. He wasn't a person who was, if he gave you something, he wasn't going to go out and tell anybody. That was between you and him. And he is the epitome of what the Unitarian Church is all about. So I thank you.